Okay, welcome. We're going to talk about a pretty serious subject here, the Eastern Front, World War II. This is a massive subject, and this is a long presentation. I'm going to apologize ahead of time because I'm going to go fast, so this doesn't turn out to be a 30-minute video. Obviously, at any time, if I went too quick, just hit pause and you can look at the text. I will try not to read all the text here, but one statistic I do want to draw your attention to is this right here. 80% of Soviet boys born in 1923 did not survive World War II. They were killed. They were 18 when the war started for them in 1941, and that just goes to show what kind of a sacrifice the Soviets made. Here we have a Soviet soldier holding up the Nazi tank as it's going to take Stalingrad. So Operation Barbarossa was the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union, June 22nd, 41, the largest invasion in the history of the world. This is about roughly a 600-mile front. They invaded across it in classic blitzkrieg style across vast areas. They encircled, right here, areas of the Soviet Union, which resulted in some sieges, notably the one in Kiev. And they got up, their high water mark was Leningrad up here in the north, Moscow, and then way down here off the page is Stalingrad, which we'll get into. That's about the extent that they penetrated, but again, they're penetrating hundreds of miles into the Soviet Union. So we look at it's mind-boggling. I mean, Napoleon invaded, and obviously that turned out disastrous for him when he invaded Russia. Hitler did the same thing. I mean, he embarked on this massive campaign. It was known as, again, Barbarossa. This is the greatest land battle ever. We're looking at, unbelievably, 25 million casualties from 1941 all the way up to 43. Really, from 43 on, the Nazis are falling back. The Germans are falling back. Eventually, they get defeated in 45. But this is an epic struggle. It's where the vast majority of fighting was taking place. Problem with Barbarossa, they had some big problems at the beginning. He didn't get going until the middle of the summer. They didn't really worry about that because of how they went through France and Poland with really little problems. Hitler looked at the Red Army as a paper tiger. Yes, they had 3 million men each, and the Soviets had 20,000 tanks. However, the 3,300 German tanks were much, much better. The problem for Hitler, again, was tactical knowledge, how to approach winning in the Soviet Union, which was, which was not a easy thing to do one way or the other. If you look at this slide here, it just gives you an idea of the manpower. In 41, the Soviets had 5 million men. The Germans had 3 million men. In 42, despite heavy losses, Soviets still have 5 million men. The Germans are down 200,000. Go to 43, now the Soviets are up another 1.2 million men in the army. The Germans are down to 2.9, and a lot of these are greener troops. Same deal with the Soviets, but again, they're now double the size. By 1944, they're up to 6.8 million troops. The Germans got 3.1 million, and these are all young or old conscripts, and they've kind of meat grinded through their numbers, and the Soviet Union has just gotten stronger over and over again. So the Eastern Front is where it was at. I mean, yes, I'm a big American patriot, and I like D-Day, but really, all right, they say 4 million Axis troops and 8 million Soviet troops were killed, died of starvation, disease, exposure, friendly fire, or as POWs. So, I mean, you're looking at 12 million dead between the Germans and the Soviets. It's unbelievable, the numbers. Germany, they committed widespread atrocities against the civilians of the Holocaust. When the Soviet army came back, they paid the German people back in kind. And you get some very brutal stories. POWs were treated horribly, and another 20 million Soviet civilians died. Massacres, disease, starvations. I mean, and you know, Gorbachev later on estimated it might even be up to 27, 28 million died in the war. It's unbelievable, and that's, again, Americans. We sacrificed, but we sacrificed 400,000 of our troops, not 27 million. Again, the Germans almost won. And it was close, and the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, played a critical role. The Soviet Air Force was destroyed immediately. I mean, in a matter of days, and they killed, of course, Stalin killed the general in charge, and the German army was mobile and the Russians would surrender. They weren't. I mean, they had very poor leadership. Stalin had purged the army of all the decent leaders as they, before the war started. So they had major problems. All right, we had a couple sieges. The first siege is up in Leningrad, which is the city of St. Petersburg. It was completely surrounded, and that starts in early on in 1941. It was horrific. It was 1.5 years the siege went on. Actually, 2.5 years. Siege went on. 1 million lives of the city's residents died. Starts in 41. It's not over until 43. The city gets surrounded. Here's it's hard to see maybe, but this is an image. You get dead people on the street. It became freezing cold. All right. Starvation. There was people. They were lowered to 1/3 of the daily amount needed. I mean, it was like a couple hundred grams of bread. I mean, really nothing, or a couple grams of bread, I think, or whatever it was. The rats disappeared. All the dogs and cats, horses, gone. There's reports of cannibalism. I mean, it was just suffering at an amazing stage. Now, finally, it was so cold. I mean, people are freezing to death. But the one effect is Lake Ladoga, which is right to the east, froze over. They put rail lines on it, and they did bring food supplies in. By January 44, the Red Army had pushed the Germans back, and the city finally lifted the siege, which was a crushing blow to the Germans, and obviously happy for the Russians. Now, you go down to October 41, so we can move back a little bit. The siege of Leningrad is on. Hitler, one of his mistakes, he launches a attack on Moscow. Hitler probably thinks the Russians are on their last legs. They had lost 3 million guys, all right? But they still had another 9 million of military age. They had actually produced 4,500 new tanks during the winter. They were producing similar to what the United States was, so Hitler didn't really understand this. And that's, again, one reason why they lost. So Moscow siege, we're really not going to discuss, but there was another epic struggle in Moscow. Finally, we'll get down here to Stalingrad, the city on the Volga River, which is a major river. It bears the name of Stalin. Stalin and Hitler kind of turned this into a personal battle between the two. In May of 42, so again, it's the spring after the siege of Moscow and Leningrad had started. The Operation Blue, this German army led by Paulus attacks. They suffering huge losses, but they're determined. Stalin doesn't want to retreat, and this is it. This becomes the epic struggle. Stalin issues this: stand firm, die. We will not retreat order of the siege of Stalingrad, which was infamous. All right. It's right on the banks of the river. You look at maybe 2 million people dying in this fighting that went on for basically a year. It's one of the deadliest battles in history. Like 2 million estimated dead between both of them, which is unbelievable. All right, the Blitz starts. They have a ton of bombs and incendiary devices and air raids that killed 40,000 civilians to start the carnage. Here it is before and after. Down here is before. This is the after of this city. That was a pretty beautiful city. And they did a whole movie on it called Enemy at the Gates. These people, Stalin wouldn't let them out they wouldn't let the civilians leave, because then he would be abandoning his city, and the civilians ended up living in the ground like rats. So this is it. Here's Stalingrad. This is it might be hard to see here, but over here on this side, that's the Germans. This is the Soviets over here, and this is as far as they got. Over this way is oil fields. It's kind of one of the main motivations of Hitler and his army were to go after the oil fields. Soviet propaganda, the dog of war getting slaughtered by them, or the Nazi lion getting killed by the Soviet bayonet. Pretty typical images that were getting demonstrated. And again, it seems like it happens every time. They have an awful winter. You can ignore that. It's an awful winter. People are dying. And it comes down to like a sniper duel between these two guys. They say it got down to negative 40 degrees. I mean, again, you can look at this. It just gets into how miserable it was. It was incredibly miserable. The fighting is very severe. Just to give you an idea, I mean, these small little areas are changing hands. There's a house defended by this guy Pavlov. They held out for 2 months in one house. I mean, that's the kind of fighting it was. Gives you an idea what it looked like. Pretty awful looks. Vasily Zaitsev, this is the guy from Enemy at the Gates. He was a sniper. Supposedly he killed 242 guys with 243 shots. It's probably propaganda. The story Enemy at the Gates is Zaitsev was, they were making him famous. They sent this SS colonel to get him. They had this big stalking where he was killed. And then eventually they got him. Zaitsev got him. It's a bunch of, it's all propaganda. There's no report of an SS colonel by this guy's name ever. Here's the DVD if you want to watch it. It's a good movie just to show you what it was like. Now the Russians launched a counter-offensive. Finally, the Paulus's army is trapped. That's a German general trapped by the Russians inside Stalingrad. Stalin, of all people, is named Man of the Year. By January 43, the Soviets offer Paul surrender terms. He refuses. Hitler promotes him to field marshal, basically telling him to commit suicide because no field marshal had ever been surrendered. Here he is. Here's Paulus's army trapped by the Soviets. Okay, right there. Those arrows are the Russian army and their counteroffensive. Paulus surrenders. He's not a fool. And the Russians took 100,000 prisoners and 24 generals. You're looking at over 400,000 German soldiers dying. And this is really the crushing blow. The Paulus's army was the 6th Army. It was really good. And the Germans never recovered. From this point on, it's a steady retreat back, all the way to Berlin. Afterwards, people credited the people of Stalingrad for their courage, and they give them all kinds of platitudes. Here is more propaganda, getting killing the Nazi snake or killing Hitler, running him through the bat. Now, last slide here is this is the 3 times larger than the statue. Statue of Liberty comes to here. This is this massive statue of the motherland standing guard over the country. It's 170 feet tall. It's actually just cement. It's not even affixed to the base. With a steel sword that is, oh God, how long is it? It's pretty far, but it just shows you how serious they took this whole thing in the Eastern Front.